Hey there, and welcome to this lesson on contrast and how we use contrast in motion design. My name is Cameron, and we're inside of After Effects here, and I've got a composition settings. We're calling this criminal contrast, HD TV, 1920 by 1080, 24 frames per second, 5-second duration. A lot of times I like to work at 24 frames per second. That is just my personal preference. You can always work at 30 frames per second, 25 if that's your thing, or higher. But 24 gives a very cinematic feel to motion. That's what feature films are recorded at. So that's how I like to typically work. It's also less frames to work with inside of After Effects. So especially if I'm working with like 3D, 24 frames per second is less frames to render than 30 frames per second. So 24 is typically where I stick a lot of the times. And you're going to see a lot of the lessons I work on are at 24 frames per second. Click OK. And we're going to build a design about a criminal based off one of the images that really inspired me for contrast, which I'll show you here. So here we are inside of my Pinterest page for motion science. If you don't follow the Pinterest page for motion science, I highly recommend that you go check it out. It's got a lot of really cool boards on it, a lot of great imagery. It's very inspiring. And here's the example that inspired me. I really dug the contrast in this, specifically the red and the black, right? I liked, this was based on a 9/11. I think it's a show called Manhunt from HBO. It's a documentary. But I just really love the contrast of this, the red on black. Very contrasty, very strong statement, works really well. Same with the imagery, black on red here with no white tones, no gray tones, just straight up black and red. Love it. I guess you get a little bit of white and gray over here. But it's just very, very powerful, right? So this is what inspired me to create the example I'm going to show you here. And what I did was go out to Google and found some imagery, found some different assets I'd like to use. One of them is the fingerprint. Here's another one. This is a document. I looked for like classified documents, court documents. This says investigative report. Also found this document, just an old style telegraph. There's no rhyme or reason. Like I don't have to have, in designing for motion design, you don't always have to have something that's very direct to what it is that you're displaying, because I'm talking about a criminal here, like a mugshot. People aren't going to be able to read these words, right? And a lot of times, especially in my style of design, things are very kind of grungy and distorted. And so it's not going to be easy for someone to really zoom in here and say, what exactly does that say? That's not what this is about. This is about showing an overall feel, an overall look, an overall feel for a design. So I'm just finding imagery that just appeals to me. Here's fingerprints on glass. Thought that was really interesting. Some tape. It's really nice looking tape across here. And then I've got the mugshot here, which I took into Photoshop and I did a very quick cutout job. You can tell, if you zoom in here, look at the edges of this hair. Pretty terrible cutout job, but for the purposes of this design, it'll work just fine. We're never going to zoom way in on this guy, and it'll work. So this is from, I think this image was from maybe like Pixabay or Unsplash, one of those free image websites. Like I said, took it into Photoshop very quickly and just cut out the background. So it's just him right there. So let's start with that. Let's bring in the mugshot here, and we're going to scale it down. I don't know. That's probably too big. A lot of times in design, less is more. And I see a lot of designers who will, like, if they're featuring a mugshot, they're going to start with the image really big like this, right? Maybe he's over here, maybe he's over here, maybe he's centered. They're going to make the center image too big. And it's overpowering and it doesn't look good. And if we go back to our inspiration here, like, look at this. This is one of the terrorist hijackers from 9/11. And you can see, he's not huge in the frame here. He's very small. He's down here. So I'm going to emulate something like that. I'm just going to make him small, scale him down, bring him over here. Okay. Let's also bring in, I have some textures here. I've got some torn paper. You can see up here the preview, it's just some torn paper. I've also got this chalkboard, black heavy chalk. This is a design asset I use all the time. It's just a blackboard, right? It's very simple. To this chalkboard, let's make it have some interesting edges over here. And to do that, we're going to go into roughen edges. And we're going to crank up the edge amount here quite a bit, like 64. And you can see here, when I do that, here's the roughen edges. I'm also going to crank this value up somewhere in here. So this is with, and this is without, right? It makes hard edge lines rough, right? So let's also change this to rusty. And there we go. So it kind of creates some interesting cutout looks inside of here. And if it's not exactly how you want it, just play around with these values. It's a fun little plugin effect to use in After Effects. I use it all the time. Maybe I'll play with the scale a little bit. Something like that, maybe. I don't know. It might. Maybe make it a little bit smaller. Try it this way. Doesn't have to be a lot. I mean, maybe there. That's actually pretty nice. I like that. We're also going to make this a red background. So we're going to go to color correction tint. And we're just going to tint the white value to a red. And then we're going to swap. And maybe something in there. And we're going to turn on our rule of thirds with option parentheses. And let's go ahead and lock that layer. And let's select this guy here. And I'm just going to, we'll talk about alignment and things like that later on. But I'm just going to kind of align this guy here. His eye is on this point of interest. Basically, the rule of thirds is to set this up. You go into Preferences, General. And under Grids and Guides, there we go. Proportional grid 3 by 3. Okay, and that's going to set up these lines 3 by 3. So there's 3 across, 3 squares, 3 rectangles across, 3 rectangles down. And this tells us that this point, rule of thirds says this point here is our first point of interest when we're looking at a screen, second, third, fourth, and you can go into quadrants like this is a point of interest, that's a point of interest, that kind of stuff. So we're just going to line this guy in here. And let's actually go ahead and add a little bit of a background solid as well. Maybe shrink this down. That's probably too much. Let's go 52. And then let's just add a solid to the background. Maybe like a red, black, like that. Bring it to the background. So there we go. We'll lock that layer. We'll lock the layer above it, the chalkboard. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and play with our transfer modes here. I like, let's see, I think darken for this. Boom, immediately you can see what happens. So if I hit option parentheses here, I can't, for whatever reason, I can't think of the right words today. You can see immediately this works, right? So just changing this from normal to darken. Wow, it's already starting to work really nice. Now, we can go in and we can play with levels here. If we want it to be even more contrast, we could go to color correction levels. And we could really boost, the gray values here, bring more interest into it, maybe crunch the blacks down even more. But I don't want too much, right? I kind of like that subtle. I mean, you can also go the opposite direction here and make less contrast. or like in his face, right? So there's less detail, or we can bring more detail in. Somewhere there, you can use levels, you can use curves, different ways to go about doing this. Let's also bring in this giant fingerprint here. And I want it to be black on white. So if we set this to screen, that's not going to work. If we set it to multiply, that would work. Let's scale it down. Let's rotate it. Maybe something in here. Maybe something in there. Let's bring in this document here. Let's see. I'm not sure about that one. This one can kind of cool. This is a very large document. I'm going to scale this puppy down. Maybe set it to darken as well. You know, that's kind of interesting. So I like that. I'm going to turn that one off. I'm going to take the one called unnamed and set it to darken as well. That's kind of cool too. But like I said, you know, we don't always have to have documents or assets in design be in your face, right? It's okay for this guy to be really small and kind of pushed back in here. What's most important to me is actually seeing kind of like this stamp here and these numbers here. It kind of just, you know, based upon when I think of legal things, I think of numbers like this and stamps and things like that. I also think of fingerprints, which is why I have a fingerprint here. This is really just kind of interesting in itself. We see the word like charges, you know, even though this is a telegraph, because of the word telegraph, that is kind of like say, okay, well, this is kind of weird. Why does it say telegraph here? So maybe I'll take that, put a mask on it, subtract it. And if there's any other words that kind of stand out, which I don't think they do, right? So that's kind of cool. This feels very contrasty here compared to the rest of the imagery. It's almost like it's too much black, right? So let's try darken. That actually works a little bit better. We could try color burn. Whoops, wrong document. No, I think darken's going to work just fine there. Let's also bring in some of this paper. And maybe I'll bring in this guy here. And these files here, these are massively huge files. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it down. I'm going to rotate it. I want something along the top edge here. Right? Something up in here. But I also don't want it to like kind of take over the image. I don't, you know, like right now it's covering up this. It's okay if it covers things up, but it's very in your face at this point. Now, part of that is probably because it's white. So let's go to channel. Let's invert it. So now we're at black, and I could try darken because darken seems to be working well with things. It's purpley, right? So let's go to effect. Let's go to color correction. Let's make it black and white. Let's actually do black and white before we invert it. Nothing. Okay. So maybe that has to do with darken. Okay, that's a little bit better. Still not totally sold on it. So let's take off black and white here. And let's try darker color. Let's actually think here for a second. So let's solo it. Let's turn off the effects. Let's go ahead and rotate it back. So maybe if it fills the screen with this white, which has got a really nice texture here, this very subtle details of texture here. If we put this over the top, okay, so that's already more interesting. You can see like this line here, right, of texture. You can also see the texture in here. So if I turn it off, I can see it just barely. So let's actually go into effect, color correction. Let's do levels again. And let's kind of play around. See if we can bring any of this detail. So we're bringing more detail back in up here. That's interesting. Let's invert it. Let's try bringing an invert above. No. Let's try overlay here. That's a little bit too much. So I'm going to do Shift plus and kind of cycle through these. That's not bad. But you know, I've got these this ink footage I want to play around with this as well. But you know what? This isn't, it's just not working at this point. So I'm just going to leave it as is for now. I'm going to find one I like here. I actually liked it better before it was inverted. Yeah, not totally sold on it yet. We'll leave it there for now. What else we have here to play around with? We've got the tape. Let's bring the tape in. Let's scale it down. So we're gonna give this like some, like it says mugshot, basically. So we'll add some type here. Okay, so let's go ahead and type something out here. We'll say wanted for criminal activities. I think I just spelled this wrong. And let's go ahead and just shrink this down. Activity. Actually, I got it right. Okay. So we're going to shrink that down. Let's actually make that. Let's make it red. So we're going to put it over this. Maybe over this black tape here. Still too big. That's another thing I see a lot of times with motion designers trying to design, is that your type is too big. So something to be aware of. We're going to bring the type up into this point here. And we're going to bring the tape up here as well. And kind of see how that looks. Yeah, that's not too bad. It almost looks like the tape is being cut out here. Something else we could try here is just to make a shape layer. All right, let's draw a rectangular shape layer here. And we don't want it to be filled with the strokes. We'll turn that off. We do want it to be filled with a solid color, and that solid color is going to be black. And right off the top, I mean, this looks terrible, right? Just, let's actually move the tape. Let's drag it down. Maybe it's part of like, maybe somewhere over here. Let's actually scale it down. So again, don't be afraid to make things small, right? It's okay for things to be small. And let's actually duplicate it. And let's actually do that trick we learned before. We'll do a -15. And maybe we'll do some rotation here. No, I'm not loving it. So we're going to go ahead and turn that one off. But we'll lock it. And by locking it, it tells me, hey, like maybe we'll come back and look at this. So this block here, it looks nice, but it's too perfect, right? So one thing we can do here is we can add some Gaussian blur. So let's add a little bit of Gaussian blur. And let's just crank it up a little bit. Maybe 3-ish, maybe more. And I'm going to hit Shift-Command-H so that I can select this shape layer, but now there's no bounding box on it, right? So Shift-Command-H, there's the bounding box. When I'm doing the blur, it's hard for me to tell what's going on. So if I do Shift-Command-H again, I'm on a Mac. Now I can really increase the blur here. And this isn't doing anything. Why is it not doing anything? Let's go ahead and turn it off for now. I'm not sure what's going on there. Let's try effect. It's one of those things where I'll come back later on and be like, oh, of course, that's why it didn't work. And as you're watching this, you're probably like, oh, it's not working because of this. But for whatever reason, I couldn't figure it out. Let's do rough and edges again. Maybe let's try rusty again. That's not bad. Yeah, I don't want it to be too much, which that's a lot. Now let's try blur and sharpen. Let's try fax box blur here. Okay, that definitely works. So it just needs to be subtle. So that's with a level 1. Maybe it's like a 0.8. And you can see it's just very subtle. Let's take that below the text here. And I want to do the same thing for the text. This is a trick in motion design, is you don't want your text to ever be 100% crystal clear. You want it to always have just a teeny bit of blur. For this, I do definitely like to use a Gaussian blur. And we're just going to try a value of like 2. And so you can see there, it's off, on, off, on. Very subtle, maybe even a little bit more, maybe 2.5. Just helps the text blend in a little bit better there. So that's looking okay. Let's actually collapse some of these layers here so I can see better. I like to keep things, nice and tidy. This paper is still bothering me. Let's go back up here and let's bring in this other paper here. Okay, so that's already a little bit nicer looking. It's got more visual interest to it. We could try again and invert and go darken. I know we'll get it at some point here. Maybe kind of crunch these values. I mean, you can get totally different looks here just by playing around with these, but again, it's proving challenging to get it to work just right. So that's with, that's without. I don't mind that so bad at this point. So we'll leave it there for now. Again, it made everything a little bit darker red, but that's okay. Let's find Shift Command H to turn our bounding box back on. There it is. We're going to duplicate this guy. And let's bring this one over here and let's just scale it up. And let's focus in on maybe something like this. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to line up perfectly, but we don't want to see all of this. So let's do a mask here. Something like that. Let's also feather that mask. Maybe let's draw another mask. And let's just see what this looks like. Not loving that, so we're going to delete that mask. And let's increase the feather of this one. We can also drop down the transparency of this one. It just has to be a subtle texture in there. Yeah, that's not too bad. I like that. Tell you what, that paper is driving me insane. Let's turn off invert. Let's go up here. Let's try darker color. I'm actually going to keep it something like this. This bothers me way less than the other one was. And if we play around with the levels here, that's not going to do it. That's not going to do it. Maybe, we're just going to turn the levels off. You can see even experienced motion designers struggle with this stuff, so don't feel alone. Let's add another fingerprint here. Let's just duplicate this guy here. Fingerprint there. Duplicate, and let's just bring it down here, just to give it something down here. Not every part of your image has to be filled with something. There's a lot of like negative space here. and then here. But I want something small and subtle here. So I'm just going to scale it way down. You know, maybe something like that. If I pull up my grid here, maybe something like that. That's not too bad. And I've also got some really interesting ink footage here. Now, some of this is from some different packs I've downloaded over time. But this ink stuff can add a lot of visual interest. And I'm just using Option Command Drag to replace, just to see, you know, what looks more interesting to me. And this looks more interesting. So let's go to multiply. Again, maybe it's going into something like darken. Like that a little bit better. Very, very contrasty, right? Compared to the rest of this stuff. Let's go ahead and duplicate this layer. Let's try number 5 here. That's nice. I like those splotchies, as I like to call them. You know, I actually like that up there. So let's take 4 and let's bring 4 down. You know, and since these are moving objects as well, trying to find a good point. Maybe that something like that would work. And let's duplicate this and let's bring in, let's try 12. That's nice. Just kind of dragging around, seeing what looks, you know, nice to my eye. Let's rotate it. Just needs to be very subtle. Maybe something like that. Now this one feels like it's too much. Let's bring it back. What else we got here? Ooh, this is nice. We'll set this to darken as well. Turn off the sound. Now I'm aware of this edge that's being cut off up here, so I want to rotate it. So I would like to try to get something down in here. Right there looks really nice. Really like that a lot. And as I'm looking at this, I like how there's a little bit more detail in the contrast versus this. This is just very black, right? So maybe we try something like multiply. Yeah, it gives a little bit more detail brought into it. Let's go with this one as a multiply as well. Brings back a little bit more detail. We can use something like this over the entire image, right? These are ones that I got from Creative Dojo. If you haven't checked out Creative Dojo, do. Vincent, he's brilliant at what he does, what he teaches. CreativeDojo.net. That's really nice, but I like the red. Yeah, that one's not working for me. Let's try this one. Again, I'm just holding down Shift plus or Shift negative to go forward and back. This is pretty nice right here. How it just gives some added interest up in here, but it's a little bit not enough contrast for me. So if I go into Effect, Color Correction, Levels again, play around with this. I really want to get rid of these lighter areas here. So just playing with the gray value here. This white area really bothers me. Maybe I'll scale it up a little bit more. Yeah, that's nice. So you can see it gives some visual interest over here because of the blot is revealing this paper. It looks really nice. Looks really nice. I think that's about what I'm going to do for this stage. Essentially, I mean, we've got a really nice layout here. The type could be maybe a little bit closer to his face to emphasize that he is wanted. You know, I'm going to have to look at my grid here again. That's not bad. If I undo it and bring it back down here, I actually prefer this a little bit more. So let's bring this guy, let's bring his mugshot maybe a little bit closer in here. But then I don't like the negative space here, okay? So it's all about balance, right? And you're gonna learn about balance a little bit later on as well. Maybe it's a matter of bringing this guy over in here. Yeah, see, I like that better. So there you go. There is our criminal contrast design. I think in the next video, we're going to look at how to animate this. If we wanted to animate this and bring it on, how would we do that? So we'll do that in the video coming up next.